Recently, I was trying to piece together a timeline of some specific events in my life, and in thinking about those experiences, I was reminded of something that really stopped me in my tracks. So much so that I had to stop everything I was doing and write it down. Some of the worst things that have ever happened to us have also been some of the best things that have ever happened to us. Now, I'm not specifically talking about the truly horrifying tragedies of life. It's really hard to rethink some of those things. Though, to be fair, the truth is that many people have been through horrific tragedies and have wound up thriving because of them. Probably the best known example is Joni Eareckson Tada, who turned a horrific diving accident into an incredibly fruitful, lifelong career and ministry. I'm talking more about the kind of heartbreaking adversities that befall each and every one of us. A hard relationship breakup, losing a job, injuries, illness that push us to our limits, etc. At age 13, in junior high, I was the victim of a hit and run. A stolen car speeding down the wrong side of the road mowed me down on my bicycle. The front tire rolled across my hip and chest, crushing my pelvis, breaking 5 of my ribs, puncturing my lung. The back tire skidded across my lower body and bike, leaving lots of gashes, but somehow no broken bones. I could have died instantly. I was in ICU for 2 weeks and then spent another 4 weeks in traction. By the grace of God, I fully recovered. But more importantly, I came out of that hospital better than I was before the accident. How so? That's the crazy part. Now, anyone who knows me more than casually knows what a true introvert I am. But as a kid, I wasn't just an introvert. I was also terribly shy and had pretty low self-esteem. Now, I had friends, but I was never popular, and I always felt invisible, even when I did things that should have gotten me noticed. True story, and one that not very many people have ever heard. One of the very first things that went through my 13-year-old mind as I was laying in the road after the accident, people gathering around in horror, sirens blaring, etc., was this: how is this happening to me? This is the kind of thing that I see on the news or in TV shows. This happens to people who everybody knows. Nobody knows me. That's the weird stuff that happens in the minds of shy 13-year-old boys, I guess. It's a strange world. But when my hospital room was literally flooded with cards and gifts and never-ending streams of visitors for the entire 6 weeks, it was then that I realized that people really did like me. They really did care about me. I went from being a boy with incredibly low self-esteem to being a normal 13-year-old boy, if there is such a thing. In other words, that experience literally and permanently changed the trajectory of my life. It gave me a level of confidence that I think I needed just to survive and eventually thrive, though that would take more than a few years to accomplish. In college, I had 2 really crushing experiences. First, I went through a bad breakup. You know how that feels. And that led me to one of the few truly rash decisions I've made in my life. I packed up my car and I made a solo 3,100-mile road trip from my college in Tennessee out to the West Coast and up the coast to Washington State. In Washington, I only really knew one person. I struggled to find any good work and generally just felt very lost. So I made another rash, on-the-spot decision. I decided, hey, I'll just join the Army. Maybe they'll give me the money to go back to college. Now, I don't know what boot camp is like today, but it was no fun in the 80s. It was torture. I'll save all the fun details for some future episode maybe and just skip to the climax. 6 weeks into my 8-week torture camp, I developed stress fractures in my right foot. The pain was pretty bad, and it just got worse as I continued my boot camp experience. And finally, I went to see the doctor. He was pretty nonchalant about my options. He said, you can let it heal and then recycle, which means starting boot camp over, or you can suck it up, ignore the pain, and just get through your final week. That final week included a 15-mile march through soft sand carrying my full rucksack. Needless to say, I knew that I'd rather have my leg cut off than to go through boot camp again, so I chose to push through no matter how bad it hurt, emotionally or physically. And I made it. I proved to myself that I was stronger than I thought. I refused to let it break me. It was another critical boost of self-confidence that led to me eventually getting back into college and meeting and marrying the woman of my dreams. But that would never have happened to me before the adversities. As a young father in my late 20s, my second-born child contracted spinal meningitis at only 2 weeks old. My baby was in the hospital with tubes in his tiny body, and my wife was living at the hospital with him. I was at home trying to take care of our 2-year-old while continuing to work in an emotionally exhausting work environment and driving back and forth to the hospital every day to be with my wife and my baby. It was a horrific experience, but it was also one of a handful of times in my life that God spoke to me so clearly that it was almost audible. His word to me was private, but it gave me the strength and the confidence and the determination that I needed to keep going despite the trials I was experiencing. I would never, ever choose to go through that again, but without the adversity, I probably would never have slowed down long enough to be still and hear God's voice in such a powerful, life-altering way. Like David said in Psalm 23, He made me lie down in green pastures, and I've literally never been the same since. I have more examples, but I think you get the point. Some of the worst things that have ever happened to us have also been some of the best things that have ever happened to us. At the time of this recording, I'm thinking about Easter and Holy Week. Talk about adversity. The absolute torture that Christ endured on our behalf, yours and mine, is beyond comprehension. But it also proves my point. There's a reason we call the day of torture and crucifixion Good Friday. What seemed like Jesus' greatest defeat was just the beginning of his greatest victory. In my personal library, I have an old book from 1984 by Tony Campolo called It's Friday, but Sunday's Coming. Let me read you just a little excerpt from the end of that book. He's talking about a sermon that his pastor had preached one Sunday. For an hour and a half, he preached one line over and over again. For an hour and a half, he stood that crowd on its ear with just one line. That line was, It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. That statement may not blow you away, but you should have heard him do it. He started his sermon real softly by saying, It was Friday. It was Friday and my Jesus was dead on the tree. But that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. He came on louder and he said, It was Friday and Mary was crying her eyes out. The disciples were running in every direction, like sheep without a shepherd. But that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. He picked up the volume still more and shouted, It was Friday. The cynics were looking at the world and saying, As things have been, so they shall be. You can't change anything in this world. You can't change anything. But those cynics didn't know that it was only Friday, and Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and on Friday, Pilate thought he had washed his hands of a lot of trouble. The Pharisees were strutting around, laughing and poking each other in the ribs. They thought they were back in charge of things, but they didn't know it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. He kept working on that one phrase for an hour and a half. He had me and everybody else so worked up that I don't think any of us could have stood it very much longer. At the end of his message, he just stood up and yelled at the top of his lungs, It's Friday! And all 500 of us in that church yelled back with one accord, Sunday's coming! When you apply enough pressure to things like, say, cacao nibs or coffee beans, it can be reduced to a powder. But when you apply pressure to something made of rubber, the recoil can catapult it into the air. The difference is not the pressure, not the adversity, but what each thing is made of. And you, my friend, were not made to be crushed. In 2 Corinthians 4:7, the Apostle Paul writes, Now we have this treasure in clay jars, so that this extraordinary power may be from God and not from us. We are pressured in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. Some of the worst things that have ever happened to you may have also been some of the best things that have ever happened to you. It may seem like Friday right now, but Sunday's coming. Just hang in there. And remember, a better mind always leads to a better life.